Sarah de Leeuw, author of 6 literary books, creative nonfiction and poetry, and co-editor of 5 academic texts. Sarah is an interdisciplinary scholar whose work focuses broadly on marginalized peoples and geographies. Nominated in 2017 for a Governor General's Literary Prize in Nonfiction, de Leeuw also holds a Western Magazine Gold Award, 2 CBC Literary Prizes for creative nonfiction, and a Dorothy Live CBC Book Prize for Poetry. Currently, the president of the League of Canadian Poets, de Leeuw has a PhD in Historical Cultural Geography and is a professor and Canada Research Chair in Humanities and Health Inequities with the Northern Medical Program in Prince George, a distributed site of UBC's Faculty of Medicine. She grew up on Haida Gwaii and now divides her time between Prince George and Kelowna, British Columbia.
The reading that I'm about to give today will be 4 fairly short poems from my most recently published collection, Outside America. Just a huge thanks to Nightwood Editions for being spectacular folks to read with or to work with. But I'm going to include a poem that I don't normally read, but just because it's about sort of unbounded American masculinity and action heroes and sort of bourbon and all the rest of it. After I finish the 4 shortish poems from Outside America, I'll tell you a little bit about a new manuscript that I'm working on that's sort of a follow-up to a book of poetry that I published with the ever wonderful Caitlin Press called Skeena. And Skeena was envisioned initially as being part of a trilogy, and I've been working on the second part of that trilogy for a couple of years now, so I'll end there. Anyway, 4 poems from Outside America, 2-part book looking at both the kind of deterioration of the planet due to human incursion and mapping that onto the passing of my dad. So you'll see those themes throughout this reading. Rogue stars. Think about light bright, says the MIT postdoctoral scientist. How even if we can't see it, there's still light behind the opaque black paper. Our galaxies are like the pegs punched through that paper. They're bright and easy to spot, taking up all the attention. But there's still light behind the opaque black paper. So much light we can't see, focusing just on the holes. Which makes me think of glossy, thin-papered entertainment magazines, the ones in the grocery store, with stars who take up all my attention. When I'm buying tuna or a plastic box of pre-washed spinach. When I want to be thinking something poetic, something profound, about my father who passed away, about the snow touching warm car hoods in the parking lot outside, disappearing, about the hands of a man I saw who carved stone in the Arctic, a documentary. But those galaxies are so easy to spot, being one of them, obvious, so oblivious to the light behind the black. Far off north. This poem is written to a friend of mine, Shirley Teglegit from Nunavut, and her husband recently passed away, and she would always ask me about my dad, and so she knows that I've written this poem. We've had a conversation about it, but I do like to say that the poem is a bit of an homage to Shirley Teglegit, who I like to call Shirl. I was talking to her just the other day on the phone. Far off north. My friend Shirl gets paid to tell stories in hotel conference rooms, beige walls, sweating water pitchers, white tablecloths, about important morning work children were once responsible for. Their fathers would wake between pelts and ice, say, "Go look at the sky, tell me each detail." describing every cloud, every filament of wind, the weight of rain or snow or texture of air was a child's job. Hunting and traveling depended on those descriptions. So imagine, laughs my friend Cheryl, if a child got it wrong. Sometimes people wait days for Cheryl's stories when Arviat weather holds her in. Sometimes her husband worries the polar bears are getting bolder, or she asks about my mom or my dad's death. Once I learned that her daughters still name the husky pups, predicting future temperaments. And then the daughters sew dresses from sealskin, silver gray speckled hide fashioned in the style of the Twilight sagas. This is my poem for Alan. I was a Fulbright fellow with the University of Arizona in Tucson. Yes, it is a hideously right-wing state, and all of the cliched truths that you've heard about it are fact. But the saguaro cacti old growth forests are, they're bar none. So this is called Old Growth Wildfire. Outside Tucson, so not some namby-pamby moist West Coast thing, cedar or sequoia, but cut, really ripped, rock hard, bone dry saguaros popping up, flames riding dust like in some Clint Eastwood flick. Ponchos flapping in the wind, the sound of stunt horses galloping, and carriage all dynamite blasted up, dames hollering. No rain, so no silver bullet quencher. I'm whistling that 4-bar tune, and under an intestine red sky, I ask the tavern man to pour me a burning shot of bourbon, pelt that sucker back, smoke blind and dancing. And this is my final poem from outside America. My dad and I used to pick chanterelles on Haida Gwaii. October chanterelling. Listen, my father says, standing downslope from the hiking trail, trying to teach me about details, about being careful. So really he means, look, pointing out moss separating where a nurse log lifts as it rots, shrinks, shifts skyward, an opening for leaf buildup from mushrooms in semi-sandy, close to coastal soil covered with hemlock needles, dead devil's club, the odd softened yellowed skunk cabbage decaying beside tea-colored tannin creeks flowing beachward, the sea stretching to Japan, from where my father never tires of telling me those salt-roughened turquoise glass balls float to us. How distance is really small if you account for currents. How no matter how long and strong the lichen looks, it remains fragile. How one should not rip out other species in the hunt for chanterelles, and the long gilled stems of edibles should be cut, orangey gold stubs left in the ground for next year, because everything that grows on earth is left by something else, even daughters who will leave and cross oceans, or those 2 red cedars, twins attached at ankle and neck. When one falls, the other will crumble too. So my father is also saying, listen, I will die one day too. Thanks, folks. Um, I, I I often don't fill up all of 20-minute readings because I honestly get tired of hearing myself talk. And so I imagine if I'm getting tired of hearing myself talk, everybody else must be wanting me to shut up too. So thanks, Tanis. I know I know, but it's my own sort of, it's my own voices in my head. But I'll introduce the next set of poems, which have no titles and they're not sort of numerically broken out. I, along with amazing people like Sharon Thiessen, who lives down the way from me and is quite a good friend of mine, and also happens to have been somebody who went to see the movie in Toronto with Alan, featuring The Rock and his biceps. Sharon and I chat poetics, and she, of course, is an incredible educator and archive of poetic knowledge in this country, particularly around the long poem format and epic poet expressions. And she and I sometimes have the real pleasure of recent, actually, over email, of talking about investigative poetry, so long poems that often I think draw from the genre of literary nonfiction that I also work in. So the poem that I'm working on and have been working on for a number of years is entitled Lot. And Lot is in deference to Charlotte, which is in deference to the previous name. It would be a renaming, a colonial state of coloniality renaming of Haida Gwaii, which then moved back to being known as Haida Gwaii. When I grew up on Haida Gwaii, I knew it as the Queen Charlotte Islands. And I was reading a number of years ago with an older collection of work called Geographies of a Lover. I was reading with an amazing poet and literary nonfiction memoirist, Cecil Giskim. Cecil's a poet who teaches out of Berkeley, and he's kind of an amazing dude. He bikes between Berkeley and Prince George, uncovering Blackness in the colonial landscape. So his lineage charts back, he believes, to a portage in Prince George linked to Afro-Caribbean early settlers, really indicating that the state of coloniality in Canada is not an easy sort of clear-cut case of Euro-Western white coloniality and Indigenous occupants of the land, but actually there's a really interesting racialization of settler coloniality in Canada, which I think is too often overlooked and doesn't offer the kind of complex flavor that these questions deserve. So I was reading with Cecil and I was mentioning something about the Queen Charlottes and Haida Gwaii, and I was stumbling all over things, and he said, why do you stumble on this? And I was like, well, because I am a anti-colonial theorist and I believe in reclaiming the concept of Haida Gwaii. But when I grew up there, it was the Queen Charlotte Islands. And Cecil said to me, what do you know about Queen Charlotte? And I was like, I don't know, some stuffy old white British bag married to a crazy king or something. I just was a very flippant sort of, answer. And Cecil said to me, he said, there's a lot of conversation that Queen Charlotte was the only Black monarch. I mean, prior to our friend Meghan now, but there's a lot of discussion that Queen Charlotte was in fact racialized, not white, and that has been whitewashed throughout history. And I was completely fascinated by this, and I had a long conversation. I think you can look up Cecil's and my conversation. He blogged about it at some point somewhere online. But that spark that Cecil offered me about the complexity of colonial violence, particularly in British Columbia, particularly in the geographies that I grew up in, was the impetus behind trying to unpack both linguistically, imagistically, investigatively, the concept of Charlotte and Lot. So I've been working on a book of one poem. It's fairly experimental and really looks at the way language can sort of, I think, be wrinkled, particularly in processes of telling stories and naming and calling. So these are a set of sections from Lot. It won't take me too long to read. And then I'm really looking forward to a little bit of a discussion. Early on, I learned the world began here. In the beginning, this land was nothing but seawater, so they say. In the beginning, it was both light and dark, so they say. There are many names for land is only one. There are many names for water is only one. There are many names for light is only one. There are many names for raven is only one, for ocean is only one, for bear is only one, for moss is only one, for berry is only one, for salal is only one, for deer is only one, for salmon is only one, for river is only one. There are many names for stone is only one. There are many names for island is only one. There are many names for queen is only one. There are many names for song is only one. There are many names for home is only one. Form a line. Form a line from first word to last. Form a line from right to wrong. Form a line from left to right. Form a line from start to end. Form a line from dark to light. Form a line from damp to dry. Form a line from one to none. Form a line from grace to terror, from wing to tip, from fish to seal, from A to Z, from water to stone, from east to west, from south to north, from largest to smallest. Form a line from youngest to oldest. Form a line from sky to ground, from root to crown. Form a line from night to horizon. Form a line from moon to shell. Form a line from birth to death. Form a line from you to me. Form a line from sap to drought, from plenty to nothing, from sand to grass, from fur to pelt. Form a line from now to then. Form a line from us to them. Form a line from outside to in. Form a line from spoken to written. Form a line from frog to egg. Form a line from head to heart. Form a line from number to sadness. Form a line from blue to map. Form a line from song to moss. Form a line from bullet to skin. Form a line from ship to fingertip. Form a line from end to start. Thanks very much, folks.
About your professional work in health inequities and how, particularly at this moment, that might be connecting to the poetry you're writing, if it does. Mm-hmm. And if you'd like to speak a little more about that and your thoughts about that.
Yeah, Adrienne, thank you very much for the question. And I think a lot of people are curious about, like, I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts. I have a Bachelor of Creative Writing from UVic with people like Lorna Crozier and Marilyn Bowery. How did that translate into being a prof in the Canada Research Chair in a Faculty of Medicine? And the long and the short of that is, and the elevator pitch that I give to all the people who fund me and my students is, we all know that medicine is both an art and a science. It's just that the science part of that has kind of surfaced and been given privilege at the expense of the arts. And what I like to tell people is that there's a lot of evidence behind the idea that it actually is the arts and the humanities that will bring back humanism to medicine. And for all of us who aren't physicians, and like I grew up in Port Clements on the Charlottes, you know, there was no doctor in the town, let alone did I have any doctors in my family. Most of us who aren't physicians or aren't part of a clinical community really understand that we want our doctors to be more human. We don't need yet another prescription that is going to solve a micro ailment that has been diagnosed at the expense of the whole being that we are. And one of the reasons that many people who enter healthcare professions forget that is because they aren't immersed in the arts and the humanities, which really offer critical, self-reflective, political kind of orientations to the world. So absolutely, my work as a poet and my work as a literary nonfiction essayist and my work as a critical anti-colonial feminist and geographer interested in place and space inform my orientations to questions about healthcare inequities. And we need look not very far from the huge inequities that COVID is uncovering in terms of who is suffering the most and who is being marginalized the most. We can look to the absolutely despicable, racist-based health inequities toward Indigenous people that have been arising in the last 3 months, where we have known healthcare providers playing racist, bigoted games about Indigenous patients in hospitals in this province, to know that healthcare professionals need more immersion in critical arts and humanities. And there aren't very many of us. I'm one of about 3 in UBC's giant faculty of medicine that thinks most anybody can memorize scientific, clinical kind of facts. But in order to be a really outstanding healthcare professional, which is what we all deserve, we need people who are immersed in critical, socio-politically astute humanities kind of orientations to the world. So my poetry figures very strongly in that configuration. Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Thank you. And I hope all our future doctors are taking a course with you before they get their degrees.
And I have great faith in the upcoming generations of doctors, mostly because they're filled with like fabulous queer Indigenous women and racialized, not white people who come from marginalized socioeconomic backgrounds. And they're going to be our doctors of tomorrow. And consequently, they are going to be pretty great people.
We have a question about, could she talk more about the influence of Haida Gwaii on her worldview and the importance of First Nations issues in her work and writing?
Whoever asked that question, thank you. Thanks very, very much. Yeah, I think I didn't, in fairness, understand how influential Haida Gwaii was when I grew up there. So I was there from grade 3 through grade 10, and then we moved to Terrace for grade 11 and 12, mostly because the rates of teenage pregnancy were about 200% success rates in Queen Charlotte City when I was there. Port Clements, where I grew up as an elementary school child, only went to grade 6, and then there was no more schooling in the community, so I went to Charlotte. And all I wanted to do when I grew up in the Charlottes was escape it. Like, I was like, oh, the people in Vancouver and Toronto, like there's no movie theaters, there's no chains, there is nothing of sort of 21st century contemporary kind of capitalist industry on Haida Gwaii. It's very, very remote. As an adult, having gone back, so just 2 summers ago, I did a solo walk for 100 kilometers by myself with a little pack on my back. I packed my tent for 100K and hiked Haida Gwaii by myself to really try to walk and try to get my feet in new desire lines of being on the Charlottes. And I realized how much being in close proximity, particularly to the Haida Nation. The Haida Nation is a remarkably strong nation, really influenced a worldview and an understanding of the resilience, joy, humor, and wonderfulness of Indigenous people in this country. I think too often, and I say this with deference to Cree elder Willie Ermine, who talks about one of the great tricks of colonialists is to pathologize Indigenous people and to not celebrate the fact that coloniality has been trying to eradicate people for close to 200 years, and it's failed. Like, the colonial project kind of sucks in many ways. We just weren't very good at it because we're kind of dumb and bumbling, and Indigenous people, on the other hand, have survived. And I think looking at the world through that lens has been really, is in deference to having grown up on Haida Gwaii. And then, of course, I attended bar up in the Nass, up in Nisga'a country. Joe Gosnell passed away today. For those of you who don't know, Joe Gosnell was the single force in many respects behind the Nisga'a Treaty up in northern British Columbia. He just passed away today, but I used to serve Joe steak and beer at the Nass pub. So my whole life has been spent in these tiny little communities, and I've had the very good fortune of working for a quarter of a century with an amazing Cree scholar. Look her up, Dr. Margot Greenwood. And she puts up with me through thick and thin. I mean, I put up with her too, in fairness. Like today I was driving because she was hollering at me because she was on her phone and was refusing to drive. And so I was her chauffeur all day. But I think as British Columbians, if we are interested in anti-colonial work and in things like truth and reconciliation, we have to change our proximal relationship and our intimate relationship to Indigenous people in this country. And that responsibility is on us. And absolutely, having had the good fortune of growing up on Haida Gwaii, probably attuned me to that from quite an early age. So yeah, thanks, Fiona.
That question came from Fiona. And there's just one more question from Nefertiti here.
I do know Karen. I love her. She is a very close friend of mine and is lovely. Am I jumping the gun here? Can I just say, Karen?
Well, there's, I don't know. There's one about Skeena, the title.
Oh, yes.
Is spelled like the internationally acclaimed author Fauzia Rafiq's novel of the same name. Do you two know each other? I've heard each other creatively. No, Skeena, I'm assuming, is a geographical term.
So no, whoever posed that question, if you would, you can Google me and find me in about 14 seconds and drop me an email with that citation and reference. I will look that up. I'm super, super interested. The Skeena River is the second largest river contained entirely in British Columbia. So the Columbia River watershed, of course, is probably the largest watershed that informs British Columbia, but it weaves in and out of the US on the sort of 49th parallel. The Mackenzie River being the largest watershed in British Columbia, and the Skeena River being the second largest watershed. So it's the Skeena River is borders on Wet'suwet'en territory, so Gitxsan, Wet'suwet'en, and the Unistoten camp, the pipeline that avid capitalists are trying to punch through untreated territory in northern British Columbia. That's all part of the Skeena River watershed. So it's a huge swath of northwestern British Columbia that's incredibly tense as a landscape in terms of contemporary resource extraction, Indigenous, non-Indigenous relationships. And that's really what the book Skeena, which is a single long poem, because that's what I feel compelled to write. I just can't shut up. That's what the book.
Put it in your private chat, and it's by Sarah de Leeuw, and she's local. So and she's an activist too. So
I'm so curious about if we're talking about the same thing or she's referencing something.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes and no.
Okay.
There was, I guess you did see this other last question. Do you know Karen Schlenk? You're my second favorite Dr. Poet.
Yeah, and Karen is a clinician. She's a real doc. I'm a fake doc. I just have a PhD. And I really like to say that loudly when I'm on airplanes and somebody has booked me a ticket that has DR in front of my name. I'm like, I cannot save anybody. Do not turn to me in the case of a cardiac arrest on this plane. But Karen Schlenk could. And Karen and I actually have done workshops together, done poetry workshops for physicians, done work on critical reflective practice through poetics about things like overdose epidemics in the province and access to prescription drugs. And also she's just a really super cool person who dirt bikes in her spare time. So who knew how cool she could possibly be. Email address, somebody's asking me privately. I'll give it to the world because it's all over the internet anyway. It's just my first name, Sarah.DeLeeuw, DELEEUW @unbc.ca.